Ever since the beginning, there have been many different people who made a name of themselves in the field of animation. Animators like Chuck Jones, Tex Avery, the Nine Old Men, and more have somehow stamped themselves in history by creating some of the most timeless cartoons, rather if it's a 5-minute short or a full-length animated feature. However, there is one man that sticks out more than anyone else. A man who started as a simple animator, then grew into a phenomenon that even overshadowed Disney for a brief period of his career. I'm talking, of course, of Don Bluth. Now in this episode, I'm going to be looking at not only the films that he made, but I'm also going to be talking about his other projects as well, like his shorts. No, not those shorts! Thank you. And now, without further ado, Animation Lookback is proud to present Don Bluth. Now let's start at the very beginning. And I ain't talking about his career. I'm literally talking about his beginnings. Donald Virgil Bluth was born on September 13, 1937 in El Paso, Texas in a family that already had 7 kids and was raised in a farm in Payson, Utah. At the age of 4, he went to the movies and watched a film that would change his life forever. Walt Disney's Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. Ever since then, Bluth had been drawing with the hopes and dreams to work at Disney as an animator to make his drawings come to life just like Walt did. Then, in 1954, his dream suddenly seemed closer than ever when his family moved to Santa Monica, California. When he graduated high school, he sent a portfolio of his drawings at Disney, and what a happy day for Don! He got a job as an assistant animator for a year working on Sleeping Beauty. After that, he went to Argentina for 2.5 years as a Mormon missionary. When he came back, he decided to continue his education at the Brigham Young University in English literature while working at Disney during the summertime. When his education was done, Don and his brother Toby made a live theater in Santa Monica. It was some good times for them, but 3 years later, Don decided that he wanted to do a career in animation. And I don't mean staying as a simple assistant animator, oh no. This guy wanted to be a full-blown animator. So he started small for 3 years as a layout artist at Filmation Studios. You may know them more for their 80s shows like He-Man and Fat Albert. At that time, he even got promoted to the head of department. Then, in 1971, he went back to Disney and worked as a character animator in Robin Hood. Not long after, he got promoted as a directing animator faster than you can say, wait a minute, I'm what now? And worked on projects like Winnie the Pooh and Tigger 2 and The Rescuers. He also got a job as an animation director in the half live-action, half-animated film Pete's Dragon. What's the difference between directing animator and animation director, you may ask? Well, I'm as clueless as you, but I think one is for animated films and the other is for live-action films. If I'm wrong, then keep in mind I said the word think. Anyways, one of his biggest roles at Disney was when he became the producer and director of The Small One, a seasonal animated short that was released in 1978. But enough about Bluth's work at Disney, let's take a look at his personal projects, starting with Banjo the Woodpile Cat. It's about a little woodpile cat named Banjo who would always get into trouble. So one day, he decided to run away and get into a truck to Salt Lake City. Moments later, he realized that it was a bad idea. So with the help of a street cat named Crazy Legs and 3 gummy-colored cats called Zazu, Melina, and Cleo, Banjo has to find that truck that brought him to Salt Lake so he can get back home. Simple story, really. A part of the story was based on an actual event when Don was living in his farm in Payson, Utah. He had a family cat that lived in a woodpile that mysteriously disappeared and then returned a few weeks later. However, I'm not sure if that also means that the cat actually went into a truck to Salt Lake City and did a musical number with some street cats. Speaking of musical numbers, Don Bluth himself wrote the music and lyrics to all the songs in the short. During pre-production, Don came to then Disney Studios president Ron Miller to pitch this as a future project that Disney could do. But Miller rejected it because he couldn't imagine this idea becoming a money-making machine. To make this short, he brought in 2 Disney animators into his garage, who you will hear me talk about a lot in this look back as much as Don himself, Gary Goldman, and John Pomeroy. The 3 worked during nights and on weekends on this project while keeping their day jobs at Disney. After that, there were more Disney animators that were slowly but surely entering the project as well. Even though it's about a half-hour long, it took about 4.5 years for them to make this short, which is actually a little bit longer than the average production time to make a 90-minute animated feature. Originally, Banjo wasn't going to be a simple half-hour film at all. Somewhere in its development, it was planned to be a full-length feature film. Don and his team thought up of a few more characters like a termite that would save Banjo from some small kids, and a villain named Rocco who will look a lot like Warren T. Rat from something which we'll talk about later. They also thought of making it darker and have a big battle between Crazy Legs and Rocco, and Banjo would help out Crazy to kill off Rocco like at the end of the Jungle Book. But in the end, they thought that it wouldn't make the story any better, and they ditched the whole idea of Rocco, the dark tone, the termite, and making this into a movie and keep it as a short. Another idea for the short was making it a Christmas TV special with scenes of Sparky Marcus, the voice of Banjo, talking with Santa about the short. But Don Bluth said, "We forced Christmas into it, and it didn't work." We can see in the short though that they wanted to do that like snow, Christmas decorations, and even Crazy Legs dressed up like Santa at one point. When the project was complete, it was shown in 2 theaters on December 1979. It was planned to be attached in theaters widely with the Muppet movie, but that didn't happen. In the years that followed, and as Don's popularity built, Banjo would regularly run on television like HBO and ABC, and an occasional VHS release would surface from time to time. In 2009, not only there was a 2-disc DVD of Banjo, but also Iconic Apps made a Dragon's Lair style game of the entire short for the iPhone and iPod Touch. Is it any good? Well, seeing the bad reviews and numerous bugs on it, I'd say go with the DVD. While making Banjo the Woodpile Cat, Don, along with the other animators at his garage, discovered something that they never realized before. Some of the magic that Disney's animation had was gone. They realized that they weren't making films like Disney did 30 years ago, and let's face it, Robin Hood and the Rescuers never left as much of an impact as Snow White or Pinocchio. So on September 13th, 1979, on his birthday nonetheless, Bluth and 17 other Disney animators quit their jobs to make their own independent animation studio, which the press called them the Disney Defectors. Did that hurt Disney? Well, a little, yeah. Because that they left, the movie they were making at the time, The Fox and the Hound, had to be delayed and new animators had to be hired to fill the void. Anyways, back to Bluth. When Banjo was done, they moved into a 2-story facility close to Studio City, LA, and named their studio Don Bluth Productions. Their first gig was to make a short animated sequence for the song Don't Walk Away in the movie Xanadu, something that took Don's team less than 3 months to make. Even though in the movie, that sequence made absolutely no sense and it had no point to be there. But hey, we all gotta make money somehow. But Xanadu wasn't really their first official gig. Their real first project was their first animated feature, The Secret of NIMH, based on the novel Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH by Robert C. O'Brien. It's the story of Mrs. Brisby, a widowed field mouse who needs to move her family to a safer place before the farmer's plow comes in and destroys their home. But there's one problem. One of her sons, Timmy, has pneumonia and can't get out of his bed. So she goes to see the great owl, and he tells her to see a group of highly intelligent rats under the rose bush for their help. Like Banjo, the film was supposed to be done by Disney, but because they thought the story was too dark, they turned down the rights in 1972. Later on, a company called Aurora Productions got the rights from Don, Gary, and John, but would come with a price. Aurora only gave them a budget of $5.7 million and about 30 months to make the film, which is about half the cost and half the time to make an animated Disney film at the time. Bluth, Goldman, and Pomeroy were so tight on the money that they had to mortgage their homes so they can boost up the budget on their first animated film to $6.4 million. Now, why does that sound familiar? Anyways, to work with the really tight schedule, the crew had to work for long hours, and some animators even had to work at home. Oh, and I forgot to mention that they can't waste any precious time either. The crew's goal for the film is to make this feel like an animated film from the golden age of animation by not only focusing on a strong story and characters, but had to resort to use old animation techniques as well, like split exposures and diffusions to make the reflections and shadows, rotoscoping, and backlit animation for lighting and fire effects. Bluth believed that it's not only a way to lower cost, but it's also a way to save animation. But on the other hand, it's harder labor, which means more time consuming, so that idea is actually forwards and backwards at the same time. For the music, they brought in film and TV composer Jerry Goldsmith, which is his first animated film to work on. He later on said that it was his personal favorite film he worked on, so much so that he volunteered to work 3 more weeks to polish the score. This was the last film that Elizabeth Hartman, the voice of Mrs. Brisby, and Hermione Baddeley, the voice of Auntie Shrew, ever did before they passed away. But on a brighter note, it was the first film for Shannon Doherty, the voice of Teresa, and Will Wheaton, the voice of Martin, so you could say that the cast had an equal amount of ups and downs. During post-production, there was a big emergency. Apparently, they always named the main character Mrs. Frisbee. I'm not joking here, that's actually the problem. They had to find a way to change the character's name from Frisbee to Brisby so they could avoid getting sued by Whammo, the company who made the Frisbee disc. But there's a problem with that. The entire cast finished recording their lines and all said Mrs. Frisbee instead of Brisby. The solution? The sound editors had to cut some other recordings where they said burr and put it over the fur on the magnetic dialogue tracks. You have no idea how it was a close call. When it was released on July 2nd, 1982, it was the largest non-Disney animated film released at the time that appeared in up to 700 theaters. Critics everywhere praised the film for its fluent animation, its great story, and that it felt like a Disney film made in the 50s and 60s. At the box office though, they only made more than $14 million. They did make money out of it, but not enough to be considered a success. The reason for it being a failure was because there was barely any promotion to the film, the release dates were totally different in each region, and the fact that it was against major films like E.T. Other films that had this problem at the time and even posed as threats to NIMH were Jim Henson's The Dark Crystal and Disney's Tron. But on the bright side, it did win a Saturn Award for Best Animated Film from the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Films. In 1998, there was a direct-to-video sequel of the film called The Secret of NIMH 2, Timmy to the Rescue. It sucks balls. That's all I'm gonna say about it. As time would move on, the The Secret of NIMH would slowly but surely grow a cult following from both animation fans and Don Bluth fans, and they both, even Don Bluth himself, regard it as the best animated film that he ever made. But not everything from The Secret of NIMH was all good news. Remember, this film still made very little money at the box office. Because of this and the animator strike of '82, Don Bluth Productions had to file for bankruptcy. Later on, the animators reformed into Bluth Group and began with their next project, Dragon's Lair. Keep in mind this is a video game, so I'm not going to talk about this one yet. But to fill you in Bluth's history at this point, they made the games, made them very rich, the video game crash of '83 came in, and they went back to square one being bankrupt again. Anyways, while the three were big with the games, they met a merger named Morris Sullivan. By the way, for some reason, I can't find a single large picture of this guy anywhere on the internet, so let's just say he looks like the Monopoly guy. They showed him the studio and The Secret of NIMH, and Sullivan saw that they had potential, but they're just financially clueless. So he decided to team up with Bluth Group, but that's when they got bankrupt again. After that, they created another company called Sullivan Bluth Studios and moved their company to a big building in Van Nuys, California in 1985. While there, Bluth was finding more ideas for animated films, including Saturday, The East of the Sun and West of the Moon, and his version of Beauty and the Beast. But even when they were in production, they were all drawn back because of money issues. Suddenly, hope had finally been sent by the angels in the form of Steven Spielberg. Bluth and the God of Movies met during NIMH when Jerry Goldsmith told Spielberg about the movie when he was composing for the score of Poltergeist. He was very interested in the film for its classical Disney style, and this is a man who loves animated Disney films. So the two decided to join forces with Don's second animated film, An American Tail. It's about Fievel Mousekewitz, a young Russian mouse whose house got destroyed by monsters disguised as cats. Seriously, I know cats. They go meow. These cats, on the other hand, go... Anyways, he and his family had to go on a boat to New York City hoping to find a new and better life. But Fievel went overboard and made it to a different part of New York that's far away from the immigration port. Now Fievel has to go find his family and make sure he stays alive. During the production of this film, Sullivan was in the talks with the Irish government to move Sullivan Bluth Studios to Ireland. Even some of the production time was spent on moving everything they had to Ireland. Don would have a hard time leaving the US, but he thought it was a good idea. Anyways, back to An American Tail. The entire concept all started with an idea from David Kirshner of a TV special of a family of mice immigrating to the US during the time when the Statue of Liberty was built. But Spielberg thought that the idea would actually be better on the big screen. Another idea was to be set in a world of anthropomorphic animals. But Don said that movies around that world don't really get much money at the box office. I mean, look at Disney's Robin Hood. So they decided to be like in 101 Dalmatians or The Secret of NIMH, where animals can talk, but we humans don't know about it. For the writing, Steven brought in Tony Gase and Judy Freudberg, who were writers of Sesame Street, and when they were called to write this, they just finished writing Follow That Bird. The main character Fievel was named after Spielberg's grandpa, but Bluth wasn't sure of that idea because he thought, who would remember a weird foreign name like Fievel? Heck, even one of the characters in the movie thinks that it sounds weird.
Fievel? Ooh, that name's gotta go.
But hey, eventually, they learned just to live with it. Speaking of characters, remember when I mentioned the termite that was taken out of Banjo? Well, Don and his team repurposed the termite into an accounting cockroach named Digit, who works for the villain, Warren T. Ratt. To make the animators truly understand how to make animation for a movie, he brought in 2 piles of animation cells. One pile is to represent 2 minutes of limited animation, like they would do in Hanna-Barbera shows, and 2 minutes of animation in an animated film. The limited pile reached only up to his shoelaces, while the film pile reached up to his eyes. In other words, if you want to work in hand-drawn animation, you must have no heart to the environment. Now you think that now that Don's working with Spielberg, he'll get a good budget for this, right? No. The budget for An American Tail was about the same as The Secret of NIMH, about $6.5 million. This caused a problem with Don because he would tell Universal and Amblin, Spielberg's company, that they need to remove a scene for budget cuts, but they would say, the scene stays. Also, another thing that was a pain in the butt during production was the security. I know, it's weird that I talk about the security on an animated film, but hear me out. To keep this film a surprise to everyone, not only were the animators not allowed to talk to each other, but they were not even allowed to talk about the film with their friends and family. Ladies, could you survive not asking your husbands for around 3 years the question, "How was your day at work, dear?" When it was out on November 21st, 1986, it was a great success at the box office, getting about $47 million domestically and almost $85 million worldwide, making it the highest grossing non-Disney animated film at the time. And speaking of Disney, Bluth finally beat Disney at their own game by getting more money than The Great Mouse Detective, which was released the same year as An American Tail. When it comes to the critics though, it was really mixed. Some had problems with the story and characters, while others were debating if the animation was good or not. It received nominations for a Golden Globe and an Oscar and won a Grammy, all for the song Somewhere Out There. After that, there was a sequel released in theaters called Fievel Goes West, which Spielberg and Kirshner were involved, a TV show set after the sequel, and 2 direct-to-video sequels that nobody cares about. Fievel went on to be the mascot of Stevens' animation studio called Amblin Animation, which made Fievel Goes West, and also the mascot of UNICEF. And he even has his own playground at Universal Studios Orlando.
Dream by night, wish by day, love begins this way. Loving starts when open hearts touch and stay. Sleep for now, dreaming's how lovers